Hi, I'm Jason Rohr, and I'm just going to start giving my talk now. So this talk is about, let me start my stopwatch so I don't go over time. Hopefully there'll be some time for questions at the end because I've timed this to about 25 minutes. So this is a talk that's primarily about financial results. It's kind of a money talk. It's a strange talk for me to give. And I know that some people in this room are sort of just getting started in their career as independent game developers. And I don't want to give any of you a false impression because I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm kind of an old man in the room at this point, right? And I've made 19 games over that time. And a lot of the results I'm going to be showing are like comparing my 17th game to my 19th game. But when you see these results, keep in mind that I made no money at all in games when I was working on games for the first 6 years. In fact, it wasn't until my 14th game that I made any real money at all. I'll say it again just to make sure it sinks in. I made 13 games in a row without making any money. So you really got to view success in games potentially. I mean, there's a lot of, first game hit stories, right? But in general, success in games can be this long-term project, right? Success takes time to build. Making a name for yourself takes time. Getting good at making games takes time. Like I was not very good at making games when I started 15 years ago. I still, am learning every day, right? So expect failure along the way. Failure should be your primary operating mode. Don't give up. I mean, I have so many people I read about on like Reddit Game Dev or something like, we shipped our first game and we're going back to work now. It's over, like, Indie Apocalypse, whatever. Don't give up after your first failure. If you're giving up after your second failure or your third failure, you're doing it wrong, right? What about your 13th failure? And even after you have success, even after you have several successful games in a row financially, like failure can still come around and bite you, right? Like game number 18 for me actually lost money. So that's the end of the prologue for any of those of you in the room who might get the wrong impression. Now let's get busy talking about this whole Indie Apocalypse thing. So Indie Apocalypse, where did this idea come from, right? How did it gain cultural currency? I think, in my opinion, it came from a string of very publicly announced, very high-profile failures from well-known game developers who some of them had track records making successful games in the past. They openly, publicly, several weeks or months after their games came out, either wrote post-mortem articles or post-mortem interviews where they kind of talked about their underperformance or failure, and everyone kind of talked about it. It was like sort of the talk of the town at the time. I'm going to put some of these games up here, which I think of sort of being the poster children of this movement in my mind as I absorb these stories myself. I don't mean this as a critique of these games. I fully respect these games and their designers. Some of the designers are my friends. I'm not saying they're bad games at all, right? I'm just using them as these public examples that the designers themselves kind of called out. So going through the list in order here, in my mind, starting with Aztez, which is notorious, right? I mean, 7 years in development, and I have a quote from each developer at the top from one of these post-mortem interviews about how they sort of felt about the financial performance of the game. When I checked most recently on some Steam stats, there were 0 people playing the game. This game Scanner Sombra also kind of popped up on my radar as an Indie Apocalypse game. Introversion, huge successful indie developer. It's been going for a long time. Prison Architect was a gigantic hit. The next game, according to them, bombed in a big way. When I checked, there was only one person playing it in the world. Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. I remember when this game came out, just inundated with press coverage, right? Everybody was talking about this game. It's this new narrative game that's coming out. According to the creator in an interview that I read, it was commercially a disaster. When I checked, there were 4 people playing it. And Tacoma, from the creators of Gone Home, Fulbright, Gone Home was this kind of high watermark in success in the realm of like indie narrative games. Tacoma maybe wasn't as big of a failure as some of the other ones I put up on the screen, but definitely didn't perform anywhere near to what Gone Home did financially. When I checked online recently, there were 11 concurrent players. So over the 3.5 years, as I was developing my new game, 1 Hour, One Life, which was the biggest, craziest project I've ever developed, I was like hearing these stories, right? One after another. Like another developer that has way bigger budget than me, way bigger PR presence than me, maybe a way better game than what I'm making, is failing financially in this market. I'm like, geez, is this like my career's over and I don't even know it? I'm going to come out 3.5 years after this like huge project and it's just going to flop on its face. So I was really, really nervous, and my wife was really nervous. We were talking about Indie Apocalypse all the time. But somehow, maybe against all odds, 1 Hour in Life was successful. And you can see, like, I just did a sample, and there were 110 concurrent players, which is an order of magnitude more than the other games I put up on the screen. And that phrase, order of magnitude, is going to come up a lot during this talk because there's a lot of order of magnitude effects that I've been able to sort of measure with the data. And it's not just numbers of players, right? I mean, this game, as a game made by a single person, has made a substantial amount of money over the course of 4 months since it shipped on Steam, $685,000 gross. And gross is like, not without the fees taken out, without all the chargebacks taken out and all the VATs and stuff taken out, right? That's the number I actually see in my Steam control panel. And it's still making good money to this day, right? Like close to $2,900 a day for a single person. That's pretty good, right? So it's, it's an old game, right? 4 months is pretty old in the world of games, right? But it's still making money after all this time. And that 110 concurrent players, that's just like an instantaneous sample that I took on a Monday afternoon. So you might see this and say, so what, Jason, right? Like, we didn't say the indie apocalypse affected everybody, that there weren't going to be any, lucky outliers, right? Like, there weren't going to be any success stories or any games that just happened to take off for this or that reason. And I thought that at first too. I was like, I guess I dodged a bullet. Indie apocalypse didn't happen to me. I guess I'm just lucky. Wow, or maybe my game's just really that good. I don't know what, right? But then a few months ago, I was looking through Steam Charts. Steam Charts is this website that orders games based on how many concurrent players they have, right? So you can see the full chart of actually like up to the minute kind of concurrent players. And I was looking down around the area where 1 Hour in Life was on the chart. Like, what other games have about 100 or so concurrent players? And I was kind of surprised by what I was seeing down there on that spot of the chart, because I was seeing games. There were a lot of indie games down there that were at least as successful, if not more successful than 1 Hour in Life. Games, of course, that we're all talking about, like huge indie hits, like Staxel, right? We're all talking about this, 115 concurrent players, or Dead in Vinland, 116 concurrent players. This game's even bigger. Airport CEO, everyone here at GDC is talking about Airport CEO. And we're also Bisley, and this game is twice as successful as 1 Hour in Life. This is a huge game. I've heard everybody in the hallways talking about Feed and Grow Fish. 227 concurrent players, twice as, and these are not cheap games. These are $15 to $20 games, right? And this was just the beginning, right? Because as I went up through the charts, I was like, wow, here's 25 games with more than 130 concurrent players. And yes, there's some well-known games on this list, but there's also a lot that you don't know. Here's 50 more games with more than 137 concurrent players. Huge hits we're all talking about, like Adventure Communist, YouTubers, Life OMG, Sheltered Stasis, maybe I've heard of that. I don't know, Colony Survival, Liftoff. Actually, that's a drone simulator. I have played that game. Here's 100 more games, 150 concurrent players each. Here's 200 more games with 185 concurrent players each. I've put up, these all have more players than 1 Hour in Life. I've put up 375 games so far on the screen in these grids, but it's just a small fraction because there's actually more than 1,000 games on Steam at this very moment with more concurrent players than 1 Hour in Life. So, and there's actually more than 300 games with more than 1,000 concurrent players each, right? So there's tons and tons and tons of huge success stories here, like life-changing financial results for lots of game developers, but we're just not hearing about them, right? Like maybe there's more success on Steam, maybe more people making more money on games on Steam than ever before, and we just are ignoring it for some reason. Still, all that said, even if there is more success, right, a lot has changed since 2014 when I launched my last game on Steam, which was The Castle Doctrine. I'm gonna go through launch day, what actually happened on launch day for these two games to compare. And the biggest thing that everyone always talks about, sort of the main talking point for the indie apocalypse, is crowding on Steam, right? And indeed, when The Castle Doctrine came out in 2014, there were 4 games released on Steam that day, including The Castle Doctrine. Whereas when 1 Hour in Life came out in 2018, just 4 months ago, there were 42 games released that day. So an order of magnitude, I talked about order of magnitude before, order of magnitude more games released the day, order of magnitude more crowding. And of course, this meant, like, The Castle Doctrine was on that front page of Steam on the new release list for like almost an entire week before it fell off the bottom of the list. 1 Hour in Life was never on any new release list because there's just not room for 42 games on that list, right? Okay, so, but in this huge crowd, maybe press coverage can help you, right? 1 Hour in Life is kind of a noteworthy game, right? Maybe press wants to talk about it. It was like pulling teeth to get the press to cover 1 Hour in Life. 12 different websites wrote reviews with scores of The Castle Doctrine over time. During launch, I had just gazillions of articles being written about it. I couldn't get almost anybody to write about 1 Hour in Life. And in the entire history of the game, it's been out for a year, including the time before Steam. There's only been 2 review articles written. Like, nobody's covering this game. And those two results, those two factors conspired to give us really dismal results on day 1, right? 315 units. Order of magnitude, again, more units for The Castle Doctrine with 2,400 units on day 1 alone. $5,000 after 3.5 years of work. So we've all seen this curve before, right? This is like a normal first month sales curve. This is the first month of the Castle Doctrine sales in 2014. And I've seen this curve before for my other games. It's sort of the expected curve for game sales. That's the launch day peak with the slow exponential decay going off into infinity. Now the scary thing for us, and when I say us, I mean me and my wife, who was also paying attention to these results as they came out after 3.5 years of work, was that our launch day peak for 1 hour life looked like this. Now, and we know, because we've shipped other games, over the years we've seen other games, we've seen these results, like launch day is always your biggest day, right? It only goes down from there. So if we apply that same exponential decay, like using the Castle Doctrine's data as a model, like our sales curve is gonna look like this. And it's like, oh my God, we're doomed. Like we're looking at this number, like we are just doomed. The Indie apocalypse is real. But we were shocked, and pleasantly shocked, when day 2 was bigger than day 1. Like what? And day 3 was bigger than day 2, and the slope was increasing, right? Like what? Like how is this happening? And it wasn't until day 5, a full 4 days after our launch, that we hit our peak. And the peak was a little bit higher than the Castle Doctrine. So at that point we were like, okay, well, this game is much bigger, it took much longer to develop than the Castle Doctrine. I guess it's gonna make a tiny bit more money than the Castle Doctrine. Maybe that same exponential decay curve is gonna kick in and it's gonna look like, well, at least we'll have made a little bit more than the Castle Doctrine. But the actual curve looked substantially different, the shape of this curve, and it's sort of the first impetus for this talk is the actual curve for the rest of the month looked like this, which is still going down, just not as precipitously, right? And it's kind of like smeared out in this way, right? And we need to account for this somehow. And I think the best way to start accounting for it is to talk about launch week alone, right? Even that section of the curve is so different in shape that we need to be able to account for it. So what was going on during launch week? We talked about launch day. What other factors? So let's think about YouTube videos, right? Who was making YouTube videos with the Castle Doctrine? During launch week, there were only 3 videos made. There were 31 YouTube videos made about 1 hour in life during launch week alone. What about viewership? So that's order of magnitude again, right? Viewership. 24,000 views on those 3 videos versus 684,000 views on the 1 hour in life videos, right? So nobody was making videos with the Castle Doctrine, and almost nobody was watching them. We can also look at an overall comparison, just long-term, not just launch week. Like, what about the top YouTube video ever made about either of these games? Top video ever made in the history of the Castle Doctrine is 282,000 views versus 2.2 million views on the top video that's been viewed for 1 hour in life. So again, order of magnitude difference, right? Okay, so what does this mean? This curve that I put up before, which is the Castle Doctrine's sales curve, this is a press curve. This is a hype curve. This isn't all your eggs in one basket, all firing on all cylinders. Get all your ducks in a row on that launch day. Get all your press embargoes lined up, right? And they're all gonna write those articles on that one day, and that's gonna be your big coverage, and everyone's gonna find out about the game, and they're all gonna buy it. And well, then the number of people finding out about your game is just going to decline over time because those articles fall off their front pages and people aren't writing launch articles about your game like a week and a half later, right? So there's one little problem though in the 4 years that have transpired. The press kind of died along the way, right? And you might say, well, no, by dead, I mean not that it doesn't exist, but that its influence in terms of game sales has dried up substantially. And the articles that were written about 1 hour in life seem to have almost no effect. You go look at the comment rolls. Remember the old days, like 4 or 5 years ago, when some article on Rock Paper Shotgun or Kotaku would have like 100 comments? Like now they have like 3 or 4 comments, right? So I don't know if people aren't reading it or people aren't responding to it in the same way, but it just isn't having the effect that it used to. And as evidence of this, let's look at some of these Indie Apocalypse games, right? There were 45 review articles on 45 different websites written about this game, right? Tacoma even more, right? 56. Like are there even 56 websites that could write? I mean, yeah, it's a lot. They had must have had like a huge PR budget, which I didn't have, right? I did my best, emailed my contacts. My contacts ignored me, even though they've been covering my games for years, right? And but contrast, of course, I said there were only 2 review articles written, but it didn't seem to matter. Now this next game I'm gonna show, which is like twice as successful or more than any of these games, maybe all these games combined, there were no review articles written about Feed and Grow Fish. No one's covered this damn thing, yet it's successful, right? So clearly that press either, there's lots of press for those other games, either people didn't read it or they read it and it didn't, those types of people don't buy games, I don't know. That normal hype curve that I showed before, if you go on into the second month, I said it kind of goes into this long, thin tail off into infinity, and that's exactly what happened for the Castle Doctrine. Now, 1 hour in life actually started up higher at the beginning of the second month. So it's like, okay, well, we'll have a thicker tail for a little bit longer. Maybe we'll expect the tail to kind of look like this, starting at that point and applying the Castle Doctors data as a model. Now, what actually happened during month 2 for 1 Hour in Life is nothing short of shocking and is the real shape difference that I'm talking about here and the sort of impetus, the primary thesis of this talk. So month 2 of 1 Hour in Life looked like this, right? Going slowly up over time, right? To the point where at the end of the month, it was more than twice what it was at the beginning of the month, right? Like, how does that happen, right? That's not an exponential, slow decay, long tail kind of thing. Press at launch time, even if people read it, even if people react to it and buying your game, can't do this, right? Because there's no big articles being written slowly over time over the course of the second month. This curve is a sign of word of mouth, right? And YouTube videos are one type of word of mouth, and I talked about them before. They're very sort of modern, distributed internet kind of word of mouth. Twitch streaming, another type of word of mouth. So let's look at some YouTube stats for those Indie Apocalypse games. Like the #1 video that's ever been made in terms of viewership for Where the Water Tastes Like Wine has 96,000 views. For Tacoma, it's a little bit higher, 133,000 views. But look at that, it's a 6-minute long video. If you look at that video, what it is like literally is called Watch This Before You Buy Tacoma. So it's like a little review video, right? But look at the top video for 1 Hour in Life. Like I said, 2.2 million views, quite a bit more views, but 24 minutes long, right? What happened to the 3-minute YouTube video rule, right? 24 minutes of what? It is literally just a guy playing the game for 24 minutes and talking about his experience and reacting to it, right? It's a Let's Play, right? His own unique experience for 24 minutes. And when we look at this even more popular game, it also has like a 7 million view video, which is a 10-minute long video of just somebody sitting there playing the game and talking about it, right? Just what it's like to have a unique experience inside this game. So word of mouth curve, what other kinds of word of mouth can we talk about here? Well, there's like an elephant in the living room here, which is that giant spike, right? Like, what is that? Is that like, oh, PewDiePie played the game that day? No, PewDiePie still hasn't played 1 Hour in Life. Maybe someday. Was it some Twitch streamer? No, actually, that's just Christmas Day. Now, people don't buy games on Christmas Day, right? Well, I guess they do. And Christmas Day, you can sort of think about as the ultimate word of mouth day, right? You're hanging out with your friends and family, your cousins, other people in your family are playing games. You're all talking about what you've been hearing about for the past couple of months. You all just got Steam gift cards in your Christmas stockings, right? And it's burning a hole in you, and you're all like, oh, what game should I buy? I've been saving up, whatever. Now, this was a full month and a half after the launch of my game, and that kind of word of mouth can only work if people are still playing and talking about your game a month and a half after launch, right? Now, that got me thinking about how long people are playing each of these games, right? Like not in terms of hours, but in terms of like lifespan or something. But let's just first talk about hours, right? So the way there's no actual hard stats about this, so I came up with this kind of unbiased way of taking a script, taking the front page of Steam with the reviews that happen to show up on the front page, which are past 30 days, most helpful reviews, and most recent reviews, and screen scraping that, which has a number of hours played for each of those reviewers, and averaging it, right? So for Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, the average front page Steam reviewer had played the game for 10 hours on average. For Tacoma, it was 4.3 hours, right? So these are relatively short games. For 1 Hour in Life, the average reviewer had played for 44 hours, which is a lot, right? It's a longer game. And this Feed and Grow Fish game as well, 28 hours, right? So these are longer games. Now, some people with 1 Hour in Life may have gone overboard. Like the top player in the whole history of the game has played for 1,800 hours, which is like, geez, what am I? Well, keep my kids away from this game, please. But I don't think total number of hours logged is as important as like play span, right? Like how long is this game sort of part of your life in some form or another? We don't have play span stats for the other games because that's just not available. But if you think about a 4-hour game, like if people are playing Tacoma on average 4 hours before they write a review, like you can't play a 4-hour game over the course of a month and a half or 2 months or something like that, right? People do play 1 Hour in Life over an extended period of time. So I have actual detailed stats about every game, every life in the game that anyone's ever lived, right? And so if I look at the players who have played at least 1 hour of the game, from the time they started playing to when they finally quit and stopped playing for good, was on average for the entire population of players 48 days. Right, so that's more than a month and a half, right? And some players have been playing the entire year that's been out. Well, not every day, but on and off over the course of 12 months. And a good portion of players have been playing it for more than 4 months. So their play span from when they first started to when they quit for 10% of the players is 4 months or longer. So I think that what has happened here is actually that the kinds of games that people play and want to spend money on and the kinds of games they value may have changed. Like the old kind of indie success model was these short one-time experience games that you just got to play, you got to try. New model is these sort of long-term hobby, community kind of lifestyle games maybe. And that maybe the way players think about these games has changed, right? Like we used to say like, hey, have you played that game Fez or have you played that game Braid? If any people in this room actually remember those games. And now we might say, do you play, right? Like, hey, do you play League of Legends? Are you a 1 hour in life player? And it's a little weird to think about this being a new way to talk about games, right? Because given the long history of games, that's always the way we've thought about games. Like, do you play chess? You don't say, hey, you ever played that game chess ever? But I think it's a new way of thinking about video games, in particular because of the internet primarily. So I think the advice that designers give each other needs to change as well, right? We used to need to make the games, the kinds of games that we wanted to play. Now we need to make the kinds of games we actually do play, right? Like our own personal play histories don't lie here, right? Like what are we actually spending our time playing? Look at Steam, look at these stats. Like Steam is not gonna trick you here, right? And I was actually surprised when preparing this talk and I went to look at my stats, I was gonna talk about this game, What Remains of Edith Finch. And I remember playing it for one afternoon. Steam tells me I only played it for 2 hours. I definitely finished the game. I remember playing it in one day and having a really interesting, I really liked this game a lot. It was really interesting in a lot of ways. It did a bunch of things I'd never seen anybody do before with a narrative game and with interactive systems and so on. It really was just 2 hours of my life, I guess. It was a critical darling, right? It won all sorts of Game of the Year awards and all sorts of venues. It won a BAFTA. Like what game wins a BAFTA? There's a little golden face there. But despite all of that, when I looked at the stats, there were only 33 people in the world playing this kind of monster hit critical darling game, right? And it really didn't, because I only played it for one afternoon, did not integrate into my life the way a game like Rust did, right? Which I played for 336 hours over the course of 2 years. Now, I didn't play every day for 2 years or whatever. Those hours are way spread out. But Rust is an older game than Edith Finch, and there's like 40,000 people playing it at this very moment, right? So people kept hearing me talk about this game. With Edith Finch, like I've talked to several people about it over time, like every time I remember it, but I'm not constantly thinking about it because I'm not constantly still playing it, right? I've never, as far as I'm aware, convinced anybody to buy the game like that I've talked to, right? But I know of at least 8 people that I can name who bought Rust specifically because I kept talking about it. And some of them wanted to play with me or whatever, but just like, even there's probably some people in this room who bought Rust because they heard me talk about it, because I kept talking about it over time, right? So my summary of this difference between these two types of games, one which I think has become extremely risky in the modern ecosystem, it's still possible to have success with this type of game, but much more risky, is the consumable game, right? And far less risky are what I'm calling infinite unique situation generators, which, I don't think about it, I was intentionally making 1 hour in life that way 3.5 years ago. If we look at all of the gigantic indie hits that have come along, I'm not talking about just the minor hits or like the games that will make quite good money, but the games that are making an astronomical amount of money, like these games, I mean, if you actually do the numbers here, these games are making insane amounts of money, and they are all these infinite unique situation generators. I'm going to talk briefly about one outlier here, which is maybe the king of consumable content games, right? The Witness, which is just a jaw-dropping human accomplishment in terms of how much stuff and how many ideas and how deep it goes, right? This game came out smack dab in the middle of the indie apocalypse, and it basically said, hey, I don't care. I'm going to be successful anyway, right? And its concurrent player curve during the first, we actually have this data on Steam charts, concurrent player curve for the first 2 years of its existence on Steam looked like this. And this graph should look a little bit familiar to you, at least the first half of it. That kind of launch peak with the exponential decay. Now, of course, there's some extra noise there, a little mini spike there around year 1. I think that's probably when it was on sale, although I'm not 100% sure about that. So let's compare it to a unique situation generator, Subnautica. Also came out right in the middle of the indie apocalypse and apparently didn't care. Its graph over the first 2 months has a slightly different shape. So this is the Witness's graph over the not first 2 months, first 2 years. Witness's graph over the first 2 years. Here's Subnautica's graph. So you can see that the part of the graph you can actually see has a very different shape for that first year, and I got to zoom out a little bit to see the rest of it, right? So that curve, that shape, that's sort of slowly growing over time, gradually to this giant kind of explosion at the end, that's a very different curve than we used to see 4 or 5 years ago, right? Also, this property of unique situation generators holds true for all of these non-indie games. I call them non-indie, maybe League of Legends is technically indie, but non-indie games that have defined our generation as game culture, right? Each in their own way. Maybe most of them are leaning on multiplayer, and multiplayer is definitely one way to achieve unique situation generation, but that's not the only way. And this really fits in with the idea of YouTube videos and Twitch streams and so on being so important in the modern ecosystem, because how do you make a video about a consumable game, right? Anybody who wants to buy the game would avoid watching videos because they don't want the game spoiled for them. Even if you find a way to make a video without spoiling it, you're kind of not really making a video that's all that different that other people haven't already shown, right? Whereas these infinite unique situation generators, they're just obvious candidates for lots of videos, right? Otherwise, how could this one YouTuber, one guy on one channel over the past year make 159 videos just about 1 hour, one life, right? Just about one game, right? And every video that he made showed some different crazy situation happening in the game that not only had he never shown on his channel, but that no one had ever shown before because it's never happened before, right? So it's total obvious, good candidate for making video after video. This guy was making multiple videos per week, just about 1 hour, one life. And so in conclusion, it's no coincidence that those games that I see as sort of the poster children for the indie apocalypse, these are all consumable games, right? While those no-name hit games that I pulled off of Steam charts, I didn't pick them on purpose this way, but after I picked them, I went and looked at each one. I'm like, yeah, actually, these are each in their own way unique situation generators. Even that Dead in Vinland game, which kind of looks like a story kind of character game, is a kind of a roguelike story character game. So in conclusion, I would say that the indie apocalypse in general as a concept isn't real, but something has changed, right? And I think what we've had maybe is more like a consumable game apocalypse, which doesn't really roll off the tongue so well. My sort of take-home message, if you want to reduce your risk in this modern ecosystem, is pretty simple. Make unique situation generators. And it's kind of an interesting piece of advice to be giving, right? Because even if the indie apocalypse hadn't happened, I might still be giving people that advice in general. Because in my opinion, these seem like the most interesting kinds of games to be making anyway. So I think I have 3 minutes for questions. Thank you. Anybody? At 41, I'm totally blinded by these lights. It's happening.
Hey. Curse me, I'm going to keep making consumable games. I love them too much. I can't stop myself, and I'm never going to stop myself. Do you have any advice for me?
Yeah. Well, when I talked to a couple of people about this talk ahead of time, yesterday and the day before, people, other game developers, they point out counterexamples, right? And The Witness is a counterexample. And someone else pointed out Firewatch. I have not played Dream Daddy yet. I think it probably is creating all sorts of unique situations, but it was definitely sort of one of these launch hype kind of games where everyone's talking about it when it comes out. So I mean, there's definitely, if a game is inspiring enough or interesting enough to people, it'll overcome that. It doesn't need to grow long term, right? It can get enough interest on that one day. So that's the real challenge, right? Somehow in this environment, when there is no, 1 Hour in Life eventually, I didn't get to talk about this in the talk, but 1 Hour in Life eventually made it onto the front page of Steam after about a week and a half. Because Steam, what they're doing now, they're no longer just picking games to the front page. They're just letting their algorithms kind of look for patterns in what players are enjoying and what people are actually playing. And then those games kind of float to the top and get recommended, right? So that was also something in that curve that I didn't have a chance to talk about. But so that is if it's all your eggs are in one basket on that launch day and people aren't really going to be playing your game a week from now because all your biggest fans are done with it already, right? How do you build that long-term, thing? I don't know. It's a challenge. You just have to make something so blindingly awesome that people can't avoid buying it. Is there someone over here?
Yes. Thank you for the talk. Really good. Was wondering if you think the volume of games also affected the quote-unquote indie apocalypse, how between 2006 and 2012, it was significantly harder to publish your game on Steam, and then let's just say afterward, with Greenlight and then Direct, it was much easier to go and get your game out there?
Well, I mean, that would certainly magnify the number of failure stories we're going to hear, right? Because a lot more games are going on Steam. Probably a lot of games that are going on Steam, and just as this sort of bandwagon effect, like everybody's like, I'm going to make a game. I'm going to be a good game designer. It's my first game. Like, there's probably a lot of those games aren't that great or aren't that interesting. I don't want to make blanket statements here, right? But just like if we have this dog pile of 42 games every day, and everyone's like, my game didn't sell. Well, I mean, it is true. Going back to 2011, which I didn't talk about here, when Inside a Starfilled Sky, which was my first Steam game, going back to 2010, they rejected Sleep is Death outright and said, we don't want it on Steam. Inside a Starfilled Sky, I had to talk to Edmund. Do you have a contact at Steam? I pulled a friend connection, right, to get some contact at Steam, show them Inside a Starfilled Sky. I said, look, I've already sold $40,000 on my own website. $40,000, guys! and they were like, okay, you twisted our arm, we'll let it on Steam. But they jockeyed with me for release day, right? They're like, oh, you're coming out on Monday. No, wait, there's another game coming out on Monday. You're on Thursday now, back and forth and it kind of irritated me a little bit, but they actually gave me a day when no other games were coming, right? And I was handpicked by them. And the Castle Doctrine as well, they kind of jockeyed with me for release day. So yes, things have changed drastically in the way that is handled. It's definitely way more flooded. But a game like some of the games I put up on the screen for the Indie Apocalypse, they had plenty of press attention, right? They had plenty of factors that would make them stand out from the crowd. They were just really depending on that as opposed to this long-term sort of viral success, right?
Yeah, it's almost as if there was more demand for games and less titles back in those years. That's kind of one of like...
Right, I mean, basically getting a game on Steam meant a certain amount of money just sort of flat out, right? Just because you'd get eyeballs for a whole week. And it meant that Steam had picked your game and the people at Steam thought it was good enough. Right? And being on Steam doesn't mean that anymore, right? Your game hasn't really been vetted aside from not violating Steam's rules. So we have another question over here. We got, we're at time, I guess. One more quick one.
Really quick, would you be willing to share how many wish lists you had before you launched?
I don't know that number. I'm sorry. That's a good, quick question to end on. Thank you, everybody.